Dunn,
Okay.
board member from North Ogden.
Kevin Senior Homes.
Thanks, man.
Scott Zellman.
All of this important. Student superintendent.
Bob Bell.
Foundation. John Ritchie, board member. Art Hanson, secondary ed.
Ron Bellman.
Robert Peterson, the business administrator.
Scott Riding White.
Yeah, let's keep going. You have mine?
Preston Kirk. Your first came off, we actually financial advisor works on me. I'm Matt Dudville, I'm with Preston.
Anna Burleson with the Standard Examiner. Sherry Hinder for Women's Assessment. We're in
Tammy Alexander, Better Student Services.
Program Secretary of the Executive Board. Martha Campbell, Secretary for Community.
The most important one.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late. I'm the Alder, legal counsel for the school district.
Not really like to kill in time because we got to change.
You can delay enough, Lane. You're good. Thanks, and so go ahead.
We're good.
So again, thank you. I'm going to turn the down over to Lane. Lane's going to walk us through a couple of proposals for it.
Yeah, sorry, the Russians got into the computer or what there, but we're good to go. Thank you. All right, a couple of things we're going to go over. First of all, we had two surveys that we conducted. One we did kind of in-house with primarily over our Facebook page, social media. We also posted on our website. It was fairly informal, and then we contracted with Y2 Analytics to conduct the independent survey. And they'll take a majority of the time. I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about the survey that we conducted. First of all, just to understand a little bit about our Facebook page and our followers. We have about 7,100 followers on Facebook, which is a pretty good group. They tend to be supportive of the district. When we look at the analytics, you go into Facebook and it shows you who your audience is. You can see the breakdown as far as who our fans are. And if you notice what jumps out there, those two biggest categories, the 25 to 44 age range with women. So what that tells us is there's a lot of mothers who follow us on Facebook. There's some diversity on there with that group, and when you have 7,100 followers, you get a lot of interesting things that show up on Facebook as far as comments and different things. So what we wanted to do was put together a short survey that would allow anyone out there in the public, any of our followers, to go ahead and provide some input on the bond process, projects, and different things. And so what we did was put together a very simple survey using SurveyMonkey. And how many of you are familiar with that? It's a very easy program to use. We put together 10 questions, posted the link on our web page, and then also tweeted it out and then put it on Facebook. And over the course, I can't remember how many days we ran, it was about a week, there was reminders that we sent out, hey, just did you see this? Did you get a chance to take it? And we had a great response. I believe there were 784 replies to the survey, so a fair number. So quickly, I'll go through each of these questions just to kind of give you an idea of what the responses were. The first question was, how likely are you to vote in the November election? And you can see most of the respondents indicated, about 93% probably going to vote. So very strong showing there. The second question was, what is your overall impression of the Weaver School District? Of course, we'd like to see the biggest one being excellent, but a fairly positive response, about 85%. Question number 3, would you support a bond to fund the replacement of older school buildings and the construction of new schools in the district? And we're looking about just over 60% said they would support that. a few undecided, and about a little over 20% that said they needed more information before making a decision. So if you were to combine the maybe with the I need more information, there's a group there that needs to be reached as far as some education and information that needs to go out so they can make an informed decision. Fourth question was if the bond included a tax rate increase, how much they would be willing to spend extra per month in property tax. A pretty generic question. The most popular response, of course, there were some that just wouldn't support it at all. There were some that would support it no matter what, and then you had the largest groups here in the middle that said that they, the amount that they could tolerate as far as the tax rate increase and the impact there. This one was a little bit surprising to me in regards to past bonds. If we had delivered on all of our promises, the largest percentage there, over 50%, did not know, and then there was a fair amount that said that we did not complete that. And so, for me, in public relations, there's some things that we need to get out there so people understand, what we've done in the past with our bonds, particularly the last one, 2012, where we had some very major projects that were all completed. So,
And Lane, just if I could, coming up will be the 5th bond that I will have been involved in as an administrator. We have completed every project that we promised, every project. And so again, the message is that, we did or we didn't. The message is we've got to make sure that gets conveyed, communicated. I don't know where that's interesting.
yeah, very interesting. And so,
I think, though, Jeff, as a discussion, I think it's part of the demographics of what we're dealing with. Who might be interested, who might not, when you look at those numbers.
right.
I think if we did it with these guys, we might get a different result.
Right. And it is interesting because if you think about these are our followers, our fans, our parents, and they don't know this. If you look at the general population, how much do they know? So definitely some work we need to do there as far as our PR campaign. The biggest challenge facing Weber School District, that's pretty consistent when you talk to people, growth and increased enrollment and overcrowding. Those two go hand in hand. And those were...
Did you only give them those 4 options?
Yeah, those are the 4 options that they have. So we try to keep it very simple. We all get surveys. Sometimes if they're too long or they're too in depth, that deters people from wanting to take them. So we try to keep it very simple. If the bond would fund several major projects without a property tax increase, how willing would you be to vote for it? And most people indicated they'd be very willing, with some still on the fence as far as that. And again, I need more information. So that's where that educational campaign will become so important. This was kind of an open question. Take a look at the possible projects. These are all the projects the board has discussed for this bond. And then they had the option of marking which ones. They could mark more than one that they felt were the most important. And it kind of cuts us off. This is the addition to Fremont High School, the 12 classroom addition, received the most responses, followed by the new junior high in West Haven, followed by the elementary in Bermuda Far West, and then the next two, which were kind of neck and neck, the rebuild of Roy Junior High School and the new elementary in Pleasantview. That's how those projects were ranked by those who responded. And those are your breakdown on your percentages. And then really the last 2 questions, and I won't go into because there's quite a few responses, were open-ended questions. What other projects would you like to see on the bond? And then the other one was, do you have any input or suggestions? And so what it did is gave people the opportunity to chime in, to offer their input, suggestions that they may have. It's always interesting when you look over those comments as far as what people's perceptions are and what they think the needs are. I think there's some great value in that. That's why it's been shared with all of you on the board, so you can take a look at that and kind of see what people think. It's very insightful for me to look at because obviously there's information that we need to get out to the public. and it helps me identify some of those needs. So with that being said, again, understand the context of the survey, and there is a great value in that. One is allowing people to be able to have a voice and to offer some input to the board in this decision. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Scotty with Y2 Analytics, and I'll let him introduce himself. I met Scotty, it was quite some time ago, as I was trying to become familiar with the bond process. They had done some work with the Alpine School District, a very successful bond campaign that was run by Alpine, and working with some of their folks down there. We got Scotty come up and he talked to us a little bit about surveys, gave us some great insight. We put it out for bid with some other companies, and the board chose to go with Y2. So I'll turn the time over to him.
Thank you. I'm going to switch presentations briefly. Okay, good. It's very nice to be here. My name is Scott Redding. I'm the managing partner of Y2. We're a market research and public opinion firm out of Salt Lake City, and we were contracted to do some work around bond viability, some sense of where likely voters are in terms of their perceptions of the district, and where on the three options that you guys have up to now been considering would be the most likely to pass, right, in election this November, which turns out to be a complicated question. Polling has gone through a lot of changes in the last 10 years. It used to be we did all of our polling over telephones. We don't do that anymore, mostly because landlines are not universal, not even close, and cell phone regulations make it nearly impossible for us to do it that way. Frankly, people don't like it that way. Our firm has been a part of a wave of innovation to move the ball on this, and most of our surveys are done online now. We'll walk you through some things, some frequently asked questions about that piece. And we can answer any questions you have. In terms of agenda tonight, I want to talk about methodology and objectives, make sure we're clear about what we're trying to do and how we went about it. I think that's where most of the questions come from on this sort of thing. And then we'll move into political environment, how people perceive the school district and what the challenges are. And then we'll talk about the options and how we measured those. And then we'll get into some recommendations, okay? Any questions kicking off? Okay, let's jump right in. So in terms of our objectives, we want to take the temperature of likely voters about a potential bond this fall. Likely voters are a very unique group when we're talking about a year when there's not a congressional member or the president on the ballot, right? Turnout in an off year, which this is 2017, is much lower than other years. And it's not just a matter of scope, it's also a matter of demographics. The people who turn out in off years tend to be older, they tend to be more stable, they tend to be more Republican. The other thing about people likely voters is that when you ask someone if they're likely to vote, there's a whole bunch of literature on this piece. They tend to, the kind term is over-report their intentions to vote, okay? The truth is they lie. People lie about their intentions to vote. And that's because, one, they don't know, okay? They don't realize exactly what's going on and what the context would be for voting. And then two is simply there's a norm in adult society in the United States. You're supposed to vote. People feel guilty about it. So like to think of themselves as voters. And there's a whole bunch of research that my partners and other firms have done showing that just asking someone their likelihood to vote is not a good way of determining whether or not they're a likely voter. You've probably noticed some polling misses over the last few years. Many of them have to do with this crux concept. We don't rely on it. And I'll walk you through what we do instead. Okay? Second, we wanted to understand perceptions of the district. People, when they're trying to vote on whether or not to give you more money, start from a place of how they feel about you generally, and we're not just talking about parents. I love the parent poll, by the way. That's important to have an outlet for folks who want to participate, because my group doesn't let everyone participate. I'll talk to you about why. But when it comes to likely voters, many of them have zero interaction with you, right? Because they don't have kids, or their kids are long gone. And so we have to understand what are their perceptions of the district, what are their perceptions of your needs, so that your communications plan from an informational standpoint can start from a base of what do we all agree on, right? And then third, understand which elements of the bond are supported by voters. When it comes to an information campaign, you don't get 2 bites of the apple, you get 1 bite of the apple. And so if you want people to walk away with one idea that will help them understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what would that one thing be? We can talk through that. Okay? So let's talk methodology for a minute. I mentioned earlier that we did this survey online. That's a little different than providing a link to people. We are a scientific survey research firm. What that means is we use what's called probability sampling. Probability sampling is this mathematical idea where we have a known population of people, and everyone in that population has a known probability of being included in our sample. So the metaphor we always use is, I've got a pot of soup. If I stir the pot and pull out a sample of that soup, that's a good sample. If I don't stir the pot and I just pull out whatever's convenient to me, maybe skimming off the top, I'm going to miss all sorts of aspects of it. It's the same way with probability sampling. So the basis is to understand the group of people from which we're sampling. In our case here, it's likely voters, which is a group that doesn't yet exist, right? The election is in November. They haven't voted yet, so how do we determine that? And I'll walk you through a handful of the slides, but the basis is there's a file that the state keeps of everyone who is eligible to vote, registered voters file. To some people, this is a revelation, but it's been around for a couple of decades now. Anyone who registers to vote gets put on the file. It includes their contact information, where they live, and then also which elections they've been a part of. Okay, and that means like when they turned out and when they didn't turn out. And so I'm sure all of you after this meeting want to go find out, when did I turn out, when I didn't turn out. So if you're interested in seeing whether or not your neighbors vote, it's available. And the reason that that's available is for kind of election transparency reasons. And then also candidates use it to get elected, and we use it to find out who's likely to vote. Because people who vote do so habitually in certain kinds of elections. We fielded this from July 11th through 20th. We sent out 20,000 invitations for people who were randomly sampled from that list. We got 1,100 back. And that's only with 2 reminders. And in terms of geographic spread, I'll show you a little bit, but it's a little denser in places that are more stable because that matches the November electorate. And then overall, we have a margin of error about 3 percentage points based off the sample size. Let me walk you through. We do likely voters. So like I mentioned, voting is a habit. Okay? So people who vote tend to vote, which sounds tautological, but it's true. Okay? People who have never voted before are very unlikely to have voted to vote in this fall's election. Just the basics of the way that norms and the way people's participation patterns work. So what we do is we say, well, let's figure out what is the profile of the type of person who votes in a municipal general election. So in this case, we took the 2015 election, okay, which had a number of things going on in this area, and said, what was the type of person that voted in that election in this area? And this is one example. This is actually a guy off the file. He's a 52-year-old unaffiliated voter. He's been registered to vote in Utah for 33 years, so really stable. In the past 4 presidential elections, he's voted in every single one, but he's never voted in a federal primary. He's not real partisan, right? He's voted in 3 of the last 4 municipal general elections, but he's never voted in a municipal primary and receives a vote by mail ballot. This guy has an 86% probability of voting this fall. And for every voter on the file, we've calculated a probability based off the profile from 2015. And then that becomes the basis around which we poll a likely electorate. Now then we also ask, okay, so we know these people are good voters, then we ask them, in November there will be some elections, how likely are you to vote? 82% of this group said definitely likely, 15% said somewhat likely. What's really funny to me is we go after an election, go back and audit and say, okay, of the people who told us they weren't going to vote, did they vote? They did. Okay, so people don't just over-report, they often under-report too. But the file gives us a real good pattern of who are the types of people that participate. And this sample of 1,100 people are very, very likely voters. We've used this same process for pretty much all of our electoral clients, but Davis and Alpine and Park City and Granite, a handful of other districts, has been very, very accurate for us.
Does mail-in ballots influence, change some of these statistics?
It does, yeah, it has a huge effect. So in a low turnout election, it depends on the type of election, okay? So in a federal general, vote by mail does very, very little. Because everyone who's likely to vote is already going to vote, and they're going to go out their way to vote. There's like a ceiling on it. You just can't break through to people who never vote. But in a low turnout election, like this November, or like a municipal primary, you can have anything as much as 3.5 times as many people participate because the ballot showed up at their house. So it can have really huge effects. So we included a parameter for that. It's my understanding that going forward, most elections in Utah are going to have a vote by mail component. That's been the case. It's been a transition over the last few cycles. So very good question. Any other questions about this? As we build out that projection, we're able to see where these likely voters live. This is what's called a density chart. If you've ever height, it's kind of like a topology map. We're just looking for concentrations of people who are likely to vote. And basically it's population centers, but there's a little bit of a skew toward the networks in Bonneville and Roy High School, which I think is kind of important, as we'll show you some of the results here. There are some very stable neighborhoods there, older folks who are used to voting every year, not just in presidential or congressional years. So I want to talk about what we call the priorities section of the survey. Early on in the survey, we just asked people their perceptions of the district, their perceptions of the quality of education here, what they think the challenges you're facing are. And what's important is that there can be two stages to an information campaign. Stage one, prove to people that there's a problem we need to solve. And then stage two, here's the solution. Okay? What's difficult is that you don't have that much time to try and sell two stages. And so we're looking to see, when people just think about the district, do they already know about the problems you're facing? And it's our perception that that's the case. Okay? So most of our respondents perceive that you are facing, one, a lack of good teachers, and then two, overcrowded classrooms, which is a growth issue. When we talk about facilities specifically, not as high a priority, but the vast majority of these guys recognize that you need more funds to expand and rebuild schools to address overcrowded classrooms. That's the big thing that everyone seems to perceive. Also, there's a perception that you're growing rapidly and there's not enough infrastructure buildings to meet the high influx of students. And that's echoed in our focus group. So we did, I mentioned the survey, but we also did what's called some qualitative interaction. We brought in, I believe, 18 members who were all likely voters into and sat them down and walked them through all these proposals and got their reactions. And one of the first questions asked, what do you think the district is facing? Number one thing, overcrowded classrooms. They see portables, they've got kids who are in the classes, or they've got friends who've got kids, and everyone's talking about large classes. And then the focus groups were also concerned about a perception of socioeconomic inequality between high school networks. So over and over we heard Fremont and Weber are the haves, while Bonneville and Roy are the have-nots. There's a recognition that not only should we address growth, but also a strong feeling among men particularly, which is interesting to me, that the district should not be neglecting aging schools on the other side of the district. So we asked an open-ended question. In your opinion, what is the most important issue facing Weber? And this is tiny. I'm sorry, so I'll read this down for you so you can see it. The number one thing is class sizes and overcrowding. 16% of respondents mentioned that. Number two is a lack of good teachers. 16% responded that way. And some of this is the context right around when the survey was being fielded. I know over the summer there was kind of a teacher salary arms race between districts, right? That was in the news right around when this was happening. Low pay for teachers at 9%, other at 8%, and it's all over the board, okay? And then common core curriculum at 8%, funding at 7%, lack of skills, meaning lack of skills, producing students that have skills to go into college, 6%, growth 6%, which is kind of a combination of over class sizes and overcrowding, but people who specifically mentioned growth at 6%, unprepared for college 5%, resources, which is another word for funding, at 4%, high administrative costs at 3%, lack of student interest at 3%, need more buildings at 3%, and then a long tail. This is a word cloud. I don't know if you've seen these. The size of the word just represents how often it was mentioned in this open-ended question. So teachers, students, education, kids, school, the kind of stuff you imagine. But there's a few things that jump out to me as tier 2. So if you look at funding, which is up here, and classrooms and classroom. But there's a lot of issues about teachers and teachers' pay. Okay? We pulled a handful of examples seem to represent some of these categories. So growth, there needs to be more schools built out in the West Haven-Taylor area. They changed the boundaries, but by the end of the school year, Canesville will be back up to a really high occupancy. This is a particularly informed voter. They've needed another elementary school in this area since my oldest started school over 6 years ago. I know the school has land, and they can only build there if there's money, but growth isn't going to stop anytime soon. Right? Overcrowding with too many kids in one class. Over on the right side, pay the teachers what they deserve, you're going to lose the quality ones. Too much growth, class sizes are way too big. Funding, they do an excellent job with limited funds. However, future improvements can't be made without adequate funding in the new building construction class size. So it's really just teachers and growth come out. We have some basic questions about perceptions and kind of the premises for this sort of thing. So educational value, based off what you've heard, would you say that the overall education students receive from schools in the Weber School District is excellent, good, fair, or poor? 13% say excellent, 48% say good, 24% say poor, fair, 8% say poor, 7% don't know. We've asked this question in a handful of school districts. This is a very common distribution, even among school districts that are extremely well funded. I'm not sure why that is, but it always seems to come out this way. This doesn't concern me if you're asking me. So some questions about basic financial stability. So this is an agreement question. Agree or disagree, the Weber School District needs more funds to expand and rebuild its schools to meet both current and future needs. 27% strongly agree, 25% somewhat agree. So over 50% agreeing with that notion, and 18% not really being sure. This next one's a little harder to look at, but this is also a common perception, one of the challenges of school bonds. Agree or disagree, I personally have confidence in the Weber School District to manage tax dollars responsibly. 12% strongly agree, 27% somewhat agree, 23% not really sure. That's a really common distribution. Some of that is just many of these people have no interaction with you beyond being asked for money every 4 years. Right? So some funding options compared. So part of our goal here is to figure out of the 3 options that you guys have been considering, which of these has enough support to be viable in an election. This is hard to do because the bond is not going to say, here are 3 options and pick one. Right? That's not how the bond is written. And so to field a survey that way is to invoke what we know of in sociological literature as the middle bias. It's what they do for pricing, right? They'll give you a low price and a high price and then a middle price. And the middle one is the one that maximizes their profit. That, as humans, we have that tendency to think relatively. That's not the way the bond's going to go. And I can guarantee you, if I hand them A, B, and C and just say, pick one, a lot of people are going to pick B because it's going to look like some sort of compromise. So instead what we do is the following. I'm going to jump ahead really quickly. We randomly assign people to either A or B or C. And they take the entire survey in context of that option. And that lets us compare across these random groups. And we can see differences that are based off of the bond language alone. Okay? We can talk more about that, but we feel very strongly about this. I know that some other groups do it differently, and we found a lot of accuracy this way. And so the basic results are these. In terms of baseline support, the most popular option is option A, the $97 million school bond. The least popular option is option B, the $161 million school bond, when they're signed randomly. This suggests that you should either run the minimal bond that doesn't raise taxes, or, frankly, you should go for the full option, because you get no difference in support between the full option and the mid option, and I'll show you that. Understanding that you'll need a robust information campaign on the full option. There's a lot of information that needs to get out before that has legs. But if you're going to go for a tax increase at all, the middle ground is nothing for you in terms of electoral support. The focus group's results suggest that once voters are exposed to the entire plan, they're willing to fund it. We had 18 people in the room, none of which, we had some who leaned toward and many who leaned against. By the end, we didn't have anyone disagree with us, which is very rare, okay? It's not common for us to be able to persuade an entire room of people, strongly opinionated people, that funding a bond like this fully is the right way to go. But that said, it has the largest strong opposition. I'll show you that group. Getting a high percentage of voters even aware of your plans is not a small task, and that would be required in order to pass the largest bond. Across all the options, supporters cite the need for new and improved buildings to keep up with growth, and opponents are most concerned with what you'd expect, the tax increase and fiscal responsibility of the district. Okay, I'll walk you through these. So again, we're trying to simulate an election, and so what we did is we put in front of these people the exact bond language. Now, I'm going to be careful, you guys haven't approved exact bond language, but the bond language as close to as possible is what we think it would be. And so this is option A, and you'll notice the red portions are the parts that switch over the various options. So this is a $97 million bond for the purposes of raising money for constructing and acquiring buildings. Property taxes on a $243,000 residence, it's about $41.75 on a business property of the same value. But remember, down here, it's zero net increase, right? And this is statutory required language. And then we ask, now that you've read the legal language as it might appear on the ballot, if this were on the ballot today, would you vote for or against it, okay? And option B is the same, except that it's higher amounts, and then down here, instead of saying it's zero net, it says $33 per year on a standard residence and $60 per year on a business, and option C jumps up to the $96 per year on a residence and $175 per year on a business, okay? So people were randomly assigned to one of the 3. And the end results are these. So on an option A, 18% said I would definitely vote for it, 37% said I'd probably vote for it, for a total of 55% who say, absent any information at all, right? The bond language doesn't tell them what projects, it doesn't tell them what this is for, it's just some legal language that says, would you vote for a bond or not? And I'll be honest with you, most of the respondents just come to this, and this is kind of a, do I feel like do I feel there's a need or not based off of my experience? 55%. If there's no tax increase, say sure. Okay. We get to option B and there's a tax increase, drops to 52%, and option C, a higher tax increase, stays at 52%. Okay. The one thing to notice is that as we get higher, this base of strongly against slightly grows, right? And one of the things to think about is whether or not there's a group out there talking against it, right? That's one of the difficulties here. If there's a group that forms, it's like an opposition group, they can have a disproportionate effect on this. The other concern here, and this is common, is that this probably vote for group is the plurality of voters, right? People say, yeah, I'm inclined to vote for something like this, but I need more information. We break this out by high school networks, not between options. We combine the options just to say, in general, would you support or oppose in terms of the interpretation. In Bonneville High is at 58%, that network, so we geocoded where people lived. Roy High network at 54%, Fremont High is at 51%, and then Weaver High actually drops below 50%. Okay. So we follow up among those who said, yeah, I'd be willing to vote for it. What's the biggest reason why you would vote for it? And number one, new, better buildings. 2, so that's 18%. 9% said something along the lines of, education's important, try to be supportive financially. 6% say our children deserve the best. 5% say we need to reduce the overcrowding. 4% talking about expansion of current buildings. So in general, people who said they're willing to fund this are talking about addressing growth, okay, in buildings. Here's the word cloud. We see this. The big question is just the schools. We need more money for more schools, more facilities. Take a few kind of key quotes we pulled out. I'm happy with my school my children attend, but I know other schools are overcrowded or housed in older buildings. I support a tax increase if I lived in those areas because I want my children to have great opportunities in their learning environment. To maintain adequate facilities and resources, new buildings are a must. Improvements and additions, which would positively influence student learnings. And then schools around here really need the updates. Maybe give them windows. Why are all the schools so dark and dreary? Right? So we asked the opponents, what's the biggest reason why you would vote against a school bond in November? And the highest thing at 13% is no more taxes. Right? We've been taxed enough. 8% about school district accountability for the funds. 6% cite high cost. So of all the people that said that they vote against it, only 6% are talking about the cost of the thing. 5% just stay within the budget they have. 4% too much waste in the spending of the district. And 3% are citing administrator salaries and kind of a long tail. Okay, these are all very common among this kind of research. And then the biggest ones are taxes and money. Right? Why do they need more of my money?
Can I ask a question about that last one?
Please.
Did you give them those options, or was that just what they said and multiple people said the same thing?
That's right. So what we do is we give an open box and then our analysts go through and code topics. So if someone mentions 7 things, then they would appear 7 times on this list, right? So we just let them talk to us, just let them tell us, and then we'll go through and code them. Then we pull a few quotes here. Increased taxes are not the answer. While I understand teachers need to be remunerated at a higher level, which, by the way, is common among people when they perceive a bond. They don't realize that the bond can only be used for buildings, right? They think about teachers. And that there's not often enough money for supplies. I feel the higher up one goes, the salary increases exponentially, and that should stop. I understand there's pressure on the top echelon to have the district be successful, but it's the teachers who are doing the work that really counts. Cut top level pay to pay the teachers more. And that's the part of the information campaign. Right? People just think it's a blank check to the district for whatever they like to do with it, and that administrators are going to take that money. And that's a perception you have to push against. We need to do better using the money we have. Until we can pay our teachers what they're worth, it doesn't make sense to do more buildings. Okay? That's common, sometimes, especially among teachers. Property taxes are high enough. There needs to be accountability with how they're being utilized. Sure, classrooms are overcrowded and teachers are not in it for the growth of our youth. I can't give my vote for money that you see no positivity coming out of it. And buildings are not our priority. Let's focus elsewhere. So persuasion opportunities. So that is really, we gave them no information, right? And we did that on purpose because in the ballot box, which used to be you go somewhere, but even these days, when they've got a vote by mail, a ballot in front of them, we have to start with where they are. What do they know and how do they feel? If the election were today, what would happen? And that's the basic idea of what would happen, right? An option A would pass pretty clearly, right? 55% is pretty good, whereas an option C would be a real nail biter, something to be concerned about. So how do we help understand, where we could be after a robust information campaign where the public would know what was happening, okay? So we give them details about the need and some specific information about each proposal, and then at the end of the survey, we then circle back and ask them the exact same question. Show them the ballot language again and let them answer. Now, this is a fantasy world. I'm going to show you this, but this ballot at the end of the survey is a world in which everyone knows everything about the bond, and that is never going to happen, okay? So I want to be very careful about setting expectations. I'll show you. Support goes way up, but that doesn't mean that if you were to do this, that this bond would pass at those levels, okay? I've never seen a campaign that had perfect public awareness. Even the highest campaigns, I've been a part of congressional campaigns with millions of dollars of TV ads going, and the best you ever get is about 75% of voters know the names of the candidates, especially in a media environment that's so fragmented, right? People can watch whatever they like at any time. The Facebook feed is customized to them. They maybe never see any information about the bond despite your best efforts, okay? But the information is very persuasive. So here's our early ballot. We just combined options A through B just to get an average early ballot at 16% strongly support, 37 somewhat, for a 53% total. By the end of the survey, we end up at 64%, right? So once people hear about that, support goes way up. In fact, in strong support, we end up pulling from every category. So I had a chart, it's really complicated, called a hammock chart that shows where people came from. And we're getting people all the way from strongly opposed into strongly support once they've heard the details of the bonds.
Now,
Okay?
you've got up there 53% total for the tax. Is this option B or C?
It is all three average.
It's all three.
And I can show you this chart for each option specifically. Option A grows the most. But just for ease of interpretation, this is all three average. You can see the amount of growth we get just by explaining some basics around the plan. That's a very good question. I'll show you the three separate ones here soon. Okay. So an informed ballot, we go way up. It's really, really good. And then when we look at, well, what's the information that moves people the most? Out of all the details of this plan, what are the details that actually help people to decide that this is the right thing to do? Number one is building new elementary schools and adding to Fremont High School. So it's really just the description of the basic plan for option A. Moves 33% of people. Prepare for long-term growth, kind of a growth just message about what's going on in the district, 30%. Investment in better technology for better education, 30%. This is something not to undervalue. This is really common. It has done really well in other districts in the sense that as part of you guys doing new buildings, you add new technology to these buildings. And I know that sometimes you get activists here talking about, well, I was in I don't want to stereotype these people, but I didn't have a smart board in my classroom, and I ended up being a smart person, so we don't need to invest in that. A lot of people find that very appealing. Okay, and you talk about 21st century economy, we need 21st century education, and that really helps them decide to invest. Okay, just this fourth one is enough desks and building for students. Just pointing out all the portables, relocatables that are out there. A lot of people really don't like them. And so just mentioning that we're going to be able to address that issue is a big part. And then something that, and then updates and increased capacity for Roy Junior High, ease overcrowding in the West Haven area, rebuild of old and unsafe buildings like Roosevelt, and then expanding Weaver Innovation Center, 18%. A lot of people don't know what this is. Okay? They don't know what the WIC is. So in our view, if you get one bite at this apple, it really just comes down to explain the basic details, what it is we're going to fund, which depends on the option, and then talk about the fact that we need to not just address current growth, but prepare for the long-term growth of the area. It's not stopping anytime soon. Okay. We can identify audiences by how they moved. Okay. So if you look at this, there's this group of 15% that no matter what option, no matter what they read, through the entire survey, they were always strong supporters, no matter what. Right? So no matter how terribly, if everything went wrong, you'd still get 15%. This group is what we call persuadable, and this is, that color is not showing that very well. This is 37%. It's a bar this high. Okay? We call them persuadable because these are people that either ended kind of in soft support or ended at strong support, but were anywhere else on the survey. That over the course of learning this information, they moved. And in total, this is 47% of the electorate. Okay? So don't undervalue like the job that's in front of you, depending on the option you choose. regardless of what you decide to do, getting your message out is incredibly important because 47% of the electorate is up for grabs here. And then this group is opposition, and you're never going to get them. Okay, it's about 37% of the electorate would never vote for this, and some of them were people that, after hearing the details, moved against you. So that's the basic breakout for what you're looking at. Let me show you movement by option. So this is option A. 55% we start at, we end up at 69%, almost 70% of the electorate, who when you tell them that there's no tax increase and it funds all these things, very, very happy about that, right? Option B, we start at 52, we end up at 64. And then option C, we start at 52 and we end up
Go
at
back to
59.
the first.
Of course.
Go back, I think about your other one, you said 37% are opposed, but on that one it's 31.
Yeah.
Was
Well,
the other one an average?
Yeah, it is an average. That's exactly right. Because this is 31% of the people that were talking about option A, right?
Option
Whereas
A.
we jumped to option C.
So
it's
that
40.
strong opposition weakens, if you will,
Yeah,
lowers with option A.
that's exactly right. And I think the basic thing is there is no tax
No
increase,
tax.
right? So you take that argument off the table. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Go back to option B.
Sure. There's option B.
You see,
That would move 12 points on the positive.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
Option A, go back to option
14
A,
points.
14 points. And what about option C?
Option C is the least movement of all, 7 points.
7. And so you said earlier that it was either A or C would be the way to go.
So here's the question for you. Do you need to win at 59 or do you need to win at 64? And as an election guy, my answer is you need to win at 51, right? Actually 50.00001. Right? Now that's up for this board to decide, right? But when it comes to funding, 50.0001 is exactly the same as 50, as 59 or 64. And the truth is, to get to that 59 is exactly the same amount of effort as to get to that 64 from an information standpoint, from a cost, from time, resources, of educating the public. It's exactly the same investment. And the truth is, the big gap is between this one, which has real promise of passing as long as, you guys get some basic information out. Option A is going to do just fine, right? You're not going to raise taxes. People are happy with the list of projects. Option A is going to do okay. The second you raise taxes, now you're in a scenario where you have to sell this thing. And in our view, okay, this is up to the board to decide, in our view, the difference between 64 and 59 in terms of how much money is on the table, each has the cost-benefit ratio is a lot better for option C. Right?
What,
Go ahead.
if the survey was taken today, in light of the fact that everyone got their property tax notices last week,
Yeah.
and the papers get weekly notices of tax increases in every community in the county, would your survey change?
It's a very good question. The answer is, if they literally have a property tax notice in their hand this week, absolutely. Right? Saliency matters. Recency matters. Let me ask you this. Are property tax notices in people's hands in October, November?
They'll be paying them in November.
They'll be paying them in November. So they've got the notice now, and the payment comes in November. Yeah. So I would expect that to decrease things. Absolutely.
It's a pretty big bump.
Yeah.
So those opposed will even be more opposed.
I think so. I think it's likely to cause issues.
of course, a lot of them just have their bank doing the escrow.
We all get notices.
Right, but to his point, by October, their banks pay out of their escrow.
Or members of your story.
Saliency is short. Okay, there's a lot of social science on this actually.
Possibly.
For example, like a hard-hitting political ad, people will remember for about 2 days, and it's gone. It's just totally gone. Why? Because we're busy. There's a lot going on. Things pass through our brains real quick.
So let me throw this up in there, because there's a certain city in our county, and Roy's not the name, but has a school that's in it, that had a major tax increase, that also has a major election, and there's going to be turnout for that.
Define major in terms of tax increases.
17% proposal went to 43. And so there's a lot of anger out there on the people going to vote.
Yeah.
So they're going to see change, but right on that list of voting, and those people will be our bond.
Yeah, and you're the last thing, I assume. Do the municipal bonds
Yeah.
listed before the school district vote? I think often they do, it depends
So
on.
I'm just looking at the big picture saying, proposal wise, you're looking at 20,000, you send out and get 1,100 back.
Yeah.
Of those, I think we're gonna increase dramatically, and I worry about the 20% that keeps driven on the negative. Regardless if what Bob says is right, if we forgot about the tax increase, we're gonna remember that it happened, and the way it happened. And so then you have that increase, you have the county's increase, you have the gas increase, and the roads. I'm worried about all that when we're looking at option C for tax increase.
And my answer to you is option B and C will be in exactly the same spot, because in both of them, you're just another tax increase. So my point is, if you're going to go for it, there's really not that big a difference between B and C. So if you've decided, this board decides to raise taxes, there's a lot of effort that has to go into educating the public on that. But why go for, C is viable. Why spend a bunch of time on B when you're going to spend that exact amount of time and be able to push off your next bond, right? Whereas if you're just going to go ahead and leave the taxes as they're at, that's just a whole different level of information. Right? The other thing to consider is opposition groups, right? Is there going to be an organized opposition, not just to this, but to those in that city? Do you know, is there a citizen group, people agitating where they're spending money to educate people about this stuff?
I have not heard that.
There's never been one selection.
Okay.
Maybe not have to stop, just doesn't mean we'll pass it.
So think about your relationship to the electorate in November. Once you put a bond on the ballot, obviously this group can only inform, but at the same time, you're seen skeptically, right? You are now a government agency trying to raise taxes on voters, and the information you publish is seen through that lens, and there's nothing you can do about it. Any outside group, anyone else who arises to tell them information about it will be seen as disinterested, whereas you're an interested party, right? And their information will be disproportionately way heavier, just the way it is. And so if there's an opposition group that arises around any of these tax increases, they're going to have a big influence on the people that are persuaded. It's just the way it is. I know that some of the groups that typically in the past have been loud and opposed this sort of thing have quieted in recent years. I think with the economy coming back, a lot of these opposition groups are thinking about like the Taxpayers Association or like I think of them in terms of their financial sponsors, the Koch brothers, affiliated groups like Americans for Prosperity and some of the others. Well, Tea Party is more of but I get what you're saying. But like organized groups that put money into fighting this sort of stuff. They've backed off on school bonds in the last few cycles because I think a lot of schools really held off while the economy was low to really spare taxpayers, and now people are coming back because the economy's back. A lot of those groups haven't gotten involved. But if they were to get involved, they will have a disproportionate effect on likely voters' mentalities on these things. So our basic interpretation of these data is that option A is safe. You got to get your information out, but people are not opposed. They understand that floating another bond to take care of growth issues is a real issue, and they're happy that there's no tax increases associated with it. Option B and C, now you're in a sales position, and this group and the district as a whole has to put out a lot of information about what these things are going to pay for and convince people to bring them along. And B and C are a similar amount of effort. That's our basic interpretation. That's all that we've prepared to share in terms of visuals. We've also made available to the district what's called a top-line report. It literally shows every single question we asked and all of the answers and has the verbatims in it. We also have a memo that came out of the focus groups that walks through the focus group findings, and that's all in the hands of the district, so feel free to request that and go through those as well. And then also I can answer any questions if there's something.
And getting back to the mailing of the ballots, that's still uncharted territory. That question was asked earlier about the impact of the mailing ballots, which are becoming bigger and bigger. That's uncharted territory. You're not certain on that.
Well, I know what effect it's had elsewhere. So let's talk about like Davis 2014. Davis County in 2014 was one of very few counties that was 100% vote by mail. 2014 November general election. The 2014 election is best compared to 2010, but an off-year congressional election. Turnout was exactly the same. Okay? But if you look at municipal primaries and municipal generals, off years, in many areas, turnout's gone up 2.5 to 3 times because of the vote by mail. Okay? So it depends on context. In a federal general election, if you're going to vote, you're going to vote, whether it's convenient or not. Right? Whereas in an off-year election, people forget that an election's happening. They don't plan for it as well. So our expectation, what we've built into our model, is a turnout increase as a result of vote by mail, right? So since ballots are being made
Yeah,
available.
but a turnout increase that favor this or not?
Generally, okay, good question. This is a good question. So the question is, does higher turnout help or hurt? In general, lower turnout, the most stable voters are older and more Republican. The people who sway tend to be younger and tend to be a little bit less ideological. So in general, higher turnout favors a school vote. Okay? In general. This is one thing we've advised some school districts. When it's an option, it's not always an option, but a lot of school districts will say, should we go in an off year or an on year? And in general, we say an on year is better because people are turning out to vote anyway. And so you have an electorate that is younger, you have an electorate that like more Democrats show up in on years than off years, so that's helpful when we're talking about school funding issues. The trouble with 2018 now is that there's the possibility for this Our Schools Now initiative. And so there's going to be, if they're successful in their ballot, in their signature gathering, there's going to be a ballot option for people raising their taxes on teacher salaries. If you throw your bond into that mix, it's complicated. What we found in Granite School District is that whichever one comes first gets a 6-point bump, the other loses 6 points of support. So they decided, I think, I'm not sure if they voted yet, but they're considering going this year. Any other questions?
Yeah. On the ballot, the honesty of ballot language, like with initiatives, if I remember right, like when there's an initiative, does it have the pro and con with the ballot or just the ballot?
Yeah, the information, voter information pamphlet will have pros and cons and all that stuff.
But they don't see that at the ballot.
That's not in the ballot itself. And in years past, there have been, and I don't know, your county clerk gets to decide some of this, whether or not that gets mailed to everyone is a point of interpretation. I know there were counties in this last cycle where the information was just made available online. So therefore, a lot of voters went into that situation. In terms of vote by mail, by the way, we have been tracking Google statistics on low saliency, low information elections and what people do when they get a vote by mail ballot. As you might expect, the very first thing they do is Google the names and Google the stuff on there. And so the information you make available online is going to be really important in terms of information campaigns.
Good question. So given your analytics and knowing your voter profile and also knowing what you think, how many will vote for you,
Yeah.
even if you went for C, you would still win. Is that true? Can you make that prediction?
There is the mitigating factor on C is how many people you're able to help understand what's going on. Like if I were to predict today, given today's environment with no context, we're saying if you voted today, well, not if you voted today, if the district put it on the ballot and then did minimal information effort, I would expect C would fail, right? So it's at 52%, and between here and election day, there will be enough, and the information void will be filled by somebody, right? So imagine where we are in the post ballot, right? Over the course of this survey, have I given them any reason not to vote for this ballot? No, right? Okay, we didn't give them any mitigating information. We gave them facts, right? But I didn't say that school district, they waste your money. You shouldn't vote for this. But surely someone will say that, right? Surely someone in their neighborhood or someone online will make assertions that may or may not be true. But when it comes to electoral campaigns, it doesn't really matter. And so that information void would be filled. So the pre-ballot, sans any information, we're at 52%, right? With a 2 percentage point margin of error on the survey. That's a real razor-thin margin for that option C. And if this district doesn't work and put out a real concerted information campaign, you have to think what that means in terms of lift. That's not just publish a list of projects and then people will decide. It's not how voters decide. I would be concerned about the outcome of C without a concerted information campaign. Yeah, absolutely. But the same for B, right? B and C equally. Whereas A, I think you're in a really strong position. Yeah, remember that post-ballot's a fantasy world where everyone knows all the details. It doesn't exist. Any other questions? Really, really good questions. Happy to answer.
I have one for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is kind of following me. Was it 20,000 out and you see 11 back?
Yeah.
Tell me what your average is on that happening with each other.
Of course. So it's a 5% response rate. I think if we'd sent out, we actually stopped because we hit, there's some ethics and survey research about not collecting everyone who takes a survey, it costs them time, right? And statistically, I don't need 3,000 interviews to do the work I do. So once we hit 1,000, we stop sending out reminders to stop bothering people. Okay, that's the way this works for us. But I imagine if I'd sent out another reminder, we would have ended up at 1,800 or 2,000 or something of that nature, which is in the high single digits for response rate. Telephone interviews nationally are at 3% response rate as average, okay, for survey research. So this is right in the average. There are times when we'll see response rates up in the 20 to 30%. Usually that's in a municipality where everyone's really mad about something. Okay, so like we did some work, actually I probably shouldn't name names, but a certain city recently that has some issues about growth, the people don't feel like they're doing it well. So when given an option for a survey, we send out a mailer and say, hey, come take a city satisfaction survey. You get a 30% response rate because most of those people wanted to tell the city council something. Right? But to be in the high single digits, that's standard for market research rates. Yeah. Significantly better than corporate market research, but similar for most political market research. Actually, let me address this. This is a common concern. So a lot of times we think of surveys like the bigger the number of people who took a survey, the better it is. But let me ask you this. What if I sent out an auto dial in the middle of the night nationally and got 50,000 responses and then asserted that that represented the country because it had 50,000 people, which is 50 times the standard for a national survey? We would all balk, right? A survey in the middle of the night, you know, it's crazy. He's watching some weird 2 a.m. show, right? The thing about statistics and representing a total population, it's not so much about the size. The size matters for the margin of error, right? But what's more important is, do this group of people demographically, geographically, and in terms of this case, their likelihood to turn out, does it represent what's likely to happen in November? And then you want to scale it up as costs both to respondents and to the district makes sense, right? So we did some estimates. We wanted to be able to do high school boundary level stuff, and we want to be able to test 3 different survey options. So we made the calculation that 900 interviews would be sufficient for the cost-benefit ratio, and we ended up getting 1,100, which is very good. So could I get 15,000 interviews? Absolutely. That would just, but you'd be wasting money, right? It's a waste. What really we want to get is 1,000 people who represent the whole. It's why I don't publish a link publicly and say, hey, anyone who wants to take the survey, because people then take it, and this happened, Jordan School District, when they went for their $500 million bond a few years back, their pollster decided to send postcards to every single voter to have them take the survey. And response rates were disproportionate to interest in the survey, right? So teachers and parents took the survey at high rates, other people did not. And as a result, it came back and said 80% of people say that they're going to vote for this thing, and it got 34% or something. Right?
So
we don't
without being critical, for example, of the effort that Lane made with our Facebook page, just discuss that from your vantage point.
You can be critical because we understand it.
Well, it's a different objective, right? So I'm a scientific survey researcher. I'm trying to represent the whole, right? So what we tend to do is we send out an initial invitation and we look and see, okay, who is responding disproportionately lower? In the case of your survey, men were responding at lower rates than women. So we sent extra reminders to men. Women got fewer reminders because they're responding at different rates. We just send more reminders to young people because old people take surveys at high rates, even online, right? Now, in this case, older people are also more likely to vote, so we kind of do the math there, right? But what we're trying to do is make sure, because response rates vary, so we have to be careful about it. In the case of something like the Facebook page, sometimes you need to just let people weigh in, right? So sometimes people will find out that my firm is doing a survey in a certain area, and they'll call me and say, I want to take your survey. And I tell them, I'm so sorry, I can't let you. Right? You weren't randomly selected. You're not a portion of the group that we need to represent the whole. I'll refer you to the district and they can decide what to do. Sometimes we set up a separate survey. There's kind of like the comment box survey. Anyone can take this one, but this one's the real scientific one, right? In the case of this Facebook thing, I think you absolutely have to just allow, like here, let's give people a link and see what happens. But you notice that, like you mentioned, the age and gender distribution of that group, those were parents who took your survey, right? And unfortunately, parents, while they are a big block in the electorate, they're not even the plurality of the electorate in terms of the municipal general. I forget exactly the age breakdown, you can look at the top line, but I'm pretty sure it's at least 33% of the voters who are going to be older than 65. Where in the, on the Facebook page, it's like 1% of the respondents are older than 65, right? So that's the difference, right? Constructing a sample that matches the whole versus a comment box that allows, in my mind, people, generally, I know this is a term that people don't like to use, but activists, right? Generally, people who have some interest in the outcome of something, feeling like they've been heard. It's just different objectives. Yeah. But what's good, what you see from that is you've got a whole bunch of parents who, once given information about a bond, are going to tell their friends and family to vote for it. Yeah, which is good. And if you lost those people, you're being a really bad spot.
And the point is, while both are informational, one has some distortions to it because of lack of randomness,
Yeah.
lack of representation.
That's right. Their relationship to the district. Yeah, of course. Good question.
So fundamentally, when you're messaging what's move the needle, was primarily understanding the use of the money as a bond, move the needle? Is that
Yes.
Number one?
It's
So
that-
once they
yeah.
understood the use, proceeds, you move the needle.
That's right. And then number two is why, which is growth.
So those two things were enough to move the needle far enough to make a change.
Significant movement. That's exactly right.
I'm still intrigued by the mail ballots because they get it and they can read it and digest it, or they're just not walking into the ballot box and wallet. That's the first time I see it.
Sure.
And at the last election, the last presidential election, there was an initiative on there related to the school district. And I was surprised how many people sat on that, they digested it. They asked me and others that work in the school district, what is your opinion?
Yeah.
And so you would think that if we really get the word out strong to our own employees, the information, because they're going to ask, they're going to call their teacher friend,
Right.
or their bus driver friend.
Or their community council friend.
Or their community company. Do you have any data along those lines?
I think you're exactly right. Yes. So we track, especially for our electoral clients who are running for office every year, tracking. The state makes a record available every single day in the vote by mail process of who's turned in their ballots. Okay. In fact, I'm tempted to show you a chart, but that's okay. 2016. So Davis 2014. Before election day, 3/4 of ballots had already been turned in, and it was a pretty regular pace. It was kind of a boring year for Davis. There wasn't anything really divisive, and so once ballots were out at a pretty clear clip, there's a first wave, and then a clear clip until election day, another wave. But election day was 1/4 of the electorate. 3/4 had voted before. Okay. Now turn the page to 2016 general election in Utah. A very divisive kind of set of candidates at the top of the ticket. Among Democrats and independents, they turned in their ballots right away. And in fact, there was a day in Utah where if the election had stopped, Democrats would have been the plurality of the electorate in a state where it's only 9% registered Democrats. Because immediately they turned in their ballots. Republicans waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited to the point where a lot of elected officials were very nervous. And then on election day or the day before, right, postmarked, and then a bunch of people in Salt Lake County showed up at voting locations despite having a ballot in hand. We had 61% of people turn it in at the very end because they wanted to deliberate that entire time. They needed every day to figure out who they were going to vote for president. So context matters. Now, in this case, we've got some municipal, we've got some mayors up, we've got some city councilmen up. This is not usually high energy elections. Maybe in that municipality where taxes are going up really high, maybe you're going to have some people that are really fired up. But I would expect ballots go out and then just as a regular clip they come back. But your point is well taken, which is they're going to have 21 days to learn what they can about this thing. And I think that makes your job a little bit easier, right?
They're going to ask our people.
They're going to ask the people, right? The alternative, though, is also, if there is some sort of opposition group, that group has 21 days as well, right? So we've been lucky the last few years. Many school districts have not faced such a thing, mostly because they've been very prudent about it. You know, I think they've gone out and spoken to some of these groups, explained their reasoning, and the groups have said, yeah, we won't get involved. Very good questions. Anything else? Well, thank you very much for having us.
If you wouldn't mind just staying.
Sure.
I think probably what's necessary now is some more discussion. John mentioned here in just a minute, we can't make, the board cannot make a decision. You're not going to vote on anything today. But we need some general direction because a resolution is to be put on the agenda tomorrow that will be voted on.
So, board, do you have any more discussion or anything you need to have answered before we, there's a couple of thoughts I mean, it's obviously got to be published. And, there's 5 of us there, so thoughts, information, anybody, we've got Preston here, we've got Alex here, we've got Lane here. Yeah, so. Janice,
Clarify again for me when Education First is hoping to be on the ballot.
They're gathering signatures this fall. Their hope is to get on the ballot in November 2018.
18, okay. And we're talking about the bond this
This
November.
November.
And we can only bond now at once-a-year general elections. We used to have options, and the options kept being limited. The last election we had was for our bond was during the primary election in June, so it was in June of 2012. But that option's not available. It has to be on the November general election.
but to do that, we have to declare ASAP in order, that's why tomorrow is the night we can get it declared so that we're into that.
I have another ignorant question to ask. I asked Kevin and he said, if we don't tax increase, we still have to bond to redistribute our funds. Is that correct?
Say that again.
If you're going for option A, which is not a tax increase,
It's not a tax rate increase, correct?
is it a continuance of the present tax rate? What is the benefit of that? With bonding, are we just being able to redistribute our funding? What's happening with option A?
The idea of being able to bond for $97 million without a tax rate increase essentially is that you're gradually bringing on new debt as you're paying off old debt. Some would say, well, wait a minute. Without the passage of this bond, our tax rates would go down. And that's not necessarily true. In fact, I can tell you it wouldn't be true. We still have about $140 million of outstanding debt because when you bond, you're bonding for usually a period of approximately 20 years. So if this bond were to fail, well, all we'd do is accelerate the payoff of those outstanding bonds. So we wouldn't lower the tax rate. We'd just accelerate the payoff of those older bonds. So to be able to bond without a tax rate increase is just that principle of you're gradually bringing on new debt as you're gradually paying off old debt. In any of the 3 scenarios, we wouldn't issue all of the bonds at once. They'd be issued in stages. Because if you did issue them all at once, even option A, if you issued all 97 million at once, it would bump the tax rate. So it would have to be phased in. And that's okay. That's how we've done it in the past.
What length of time would that phase in over? Like on
A lot of it-
B or a C?
Yeah, a lot of it, Paul, on any of them, a lot of it depends upon growth in assessed values. And if you have robust growth in assessed property values, you can accelerate that. But I want to say on our last bond, 2012, it was $65 million.
We did 3 of them.
We-
25, 20, and 20.
Over that, sort of 5-year stretch, and our last issuance was what, 12 months ago, 14 months ago?
Yeah, we didn't do 3. We did.
Right, but when was our last issuance?
Last 16.
In 2016. So it was about every 12 to 14, 16 months, we were able to issue another 20 to 25 million. So it's just phased in.
It's a
Combination. So you're timing the projects as you're able to issue the bonds. We're not able to work, even with option A, we've got probably a pretty aggressive plan with Scott, because I can see sort of coming out of the chute that both the Remuda Elementary School and the Pleasant View Elementary School would need to be built simultaneously over the next, 19 months? Yeah.
We had a refund in 16. I think it was, our issue of that last chunk was in 15. But nevertheless, it was only staggered.
And it-
It wasn't all at once.
Phased in, but to Paul's question, some of that depends upon the rate of growth, what's happening with property values and so forth.
With our conservative estimates, we have like 4 issues, 30 year, 4 years.
I think issuance are critical, but as well as the tenure of the bond is also critical. So, and that could be worth for precedent.
I'd be interested in other board members' perceptions of this data, feedback that you've received, maybe a direction that you're leaning a little bit. No decision can be made formally in this, but we need direction.
Doug, option A, it gives a perception, maybe the correct perception, that Beaver School District has been on top of growth, and looking to the future, buying property, building schools, and that we can continue to do this because we manage the property. And you don't have to increase your taxes as opposed to C or O. We're kind of caught. We're behind the curve. Now we've got to do a big one and get caught up. That seems like the perception.
Perception is reality in my school. Until we can get them educated, and we've already found that out based off of some knowledge. So I'm steering that same direction.
Option A is probably more consistent with our history, our pattern. We've had
frugal, we've been covered on the future and the present, and we're understanding the big picture.
With the bond, you're really trying to deal with two things. One is managing enrollment growth, and the other is keeping up on aging facilities. And quite frankly, our buildings that we've replaced have probably averaged between 70 and 80 years old. And when we've replaced them, we typically enlarge their capacity as well.
Yeah.
So even on those replacement buildings, it does. Even on those replacement buildings, it still brings in an element of managing student enrollment growth.
Well, I think part of that was what's happening in our community around us as they found out about that as well. Yes, they've been successful, or they've not been successful, or they, I think we can talk about that process. And I like that process myself, I really do. As I've talked to people in the community, the constituents, and discussions on the tax increase, I think there's a sense of a little negative out there. And my opinion is, just my own, those people who are going to go on vote are those people who are really upset with the increases. And not a majority of them, but most of them don't have kids in our schools. So, Scotty, I appreciate your surveying and lanes as well, but those are numbers that I have to have in order to make a decision on our end, as mine as a board member, to say this is where I think I feel comfortable and being conservative to take care of our needs. As we look at those 96
All you can see.
I think like Scotty said, there's a real lack of communication with, anytime we mention a tax increase, you get the pitchforks and axe handles, but I also heard people say, why are we building on the Fremont? We just barely built that building. And how many years have we been in there?
23.
Right. And 23, right. And they still talk about Hooper Elementary as the new elementary. I went there in 5th grade. That was 45 years ago. That's the new elementary. I think that, careful.
Did it have dirt floors?
The whole were big.
Only on the east side.
We invented portables in old elementary. I think the thing is the communication to let these people know where we're at, because they still perceive Fremont as a new school. They still perceive Hooper School, that was 45 years, as the new school. And they don't have, they're not uploading information because, you know.
And yet, Paul, interestingly, Scotty, correct me if I'm wrong, but an addition at Fremont actually gathered quite a bit of support for the bond. Is that correct?
Yes, it did. But I've still heard a lot of that. It's a brand new school. Why are we going on? We've had a discussion of why. But I think that we need to feed out some information that's pretty clear, and things like you said, when they look at a chart or look at a piece of information, they get information quickly and easily. They don't have to do a lot because they're not going to. There's got to be a way that we can get that information out there to them that will bring that percentage up because they're informed and not take up a lot of their time after these pages.
If I have a concern about option A, it would probably be that the Bonneville Cone is left out of this particular set of projects. But I think if we're able in that process to talk about things that have happened before and things that will happen after, and to show a history of consistency in keeping our word, keeping our promises. For example, on the 2006 bond, South Auburn Junior High was built. On the 2012 bond, we replaced both Hub Heights and Marlon Hills and built Birch Creek Elementary. And we can see even from these options that have been contemplated that both Roosevelt and T.H. Bell are moving to the top of the list. I've shared this before that the Walquist community was so disappointed when they were left off the 2006 bond, and they were the first project on the 2012 bond. The Roy Junior High community was so disappointed when they were left off the 2012 bond. That you can see from this, the first replacement building proposed is the Roy Junior High replacement. My point is that even for the Washington Terrace area with Roosevelt and T.H. Bell, they can see that the passage of this bond moves them up to the top of that list in terms of replacement schools. And so they're, with some education, there'd be incentive to say, we support this. We see that the Bonneville Cone has had benefit, South Auburn Junior High, Birch Creek in the past, so we can see that we've moved up that list.
Anyway, and Bonneville isn't growth issues.
That's number one.
And people need to understand that they need to see some good numbers that can actually. I don't think a lot of people pay a lot of attention to this school district. They send their kids to get educated, come home, for the most part they're happy, and they don't understand some of the things we want.
Yeah, it would take education. We say we've kept our promises as we asked, and we know keeping our promises this time around took great effort because of some of the cost issues. But your average Joe, they don't know that, and it's more what have you done for me lately, But Superintendent's right. If we educate them, that will.
And I think some of his results, and even some of the Facebook results, show people's lack of understanding because we're passing a bond through the buildings and they're talking about teacher salaries.
Which is common, extremely common. So
I would think it's common, but I think that's just a lack of understanding, and that's some of the information that people need to know and need to understand a little better to get the support that we need.
May I bring up one more finding, by the way? I failed to mention this in the presentation. In the focus groups, there was a group of parents from, who was looking at option A and noticed that it was missing anything or going there or the bottom, pretty the bottom of there. And it was kind of like a situation where like, gosh, if option A only had to rebuild a THL, it would be amazing, right? Which I know there's constraints, but it was noticed. So if you're thinking about this communications plan, one of the things you consider, we leave option A as is, which makes sense on the merits. In your communications and information, I think communicating that these are the needs, and on our very next set, here are a handful of rebuilds that will come up, you're going to pacify some of that.
So if I could, get a little information, it's really positive work. And I'm gonna let Preston present something to us that may not be so critical as tomorrow night, but maybe in about 14 days. Will you explain that to Preston, your overthink?
The statutory requirement for calling a bond election requires that the state election official and the county election officials receive the resolution passed by a board of education no less than 75 days before the election. So the election on November 7th kind of back up and the absolute drop dead is probably like the 21st of August, realizing we probably late in the day, and the county and state aren't open, as there. The possibility exists that as opposed to zeroing in with absolute precision, what the amount is tomorrow night, theoretically, you could come back in about 2 weeks on the 17th or 18th, it would be a special board meeting, it would have to be noticed appropriately, but that opportunity or scenario exists.
Well,
With one more option.
John, with your permission, I don't see any reason why you just discuss the possibility of, from your vantage point, increasing that option A in terms of the amount possible to bond without a tax rate increase.
Okay. One of the things that we generally focused on, that is essentially something new in the last 15 years. If we were to back up into the 1990s, all the school districts would say, what are our needs for the next 10 years? They go out and hold a bond election, and they would issue the bonds for 6, 8, 9 years to build those facilities. Post 9/11, there was more of a focus on these taxpayers and other people that were out of work. Let's just focus on what needs to be built in the next 5 years. I think almost all the school districts have focused on that. Davis outlined, even your last bond election was focused on kind of a 5-year period of time. And I think that it really generally worked. We had an economic slowdown and we were kind of coming out of it. Bonds were ultimately issued, but Utah's in a little different situation now where with the in-migration, the birth rate, the subdivisions pop up, it's tougher and tougher to say, here's what we can build in 4 or 5 years and meet needs. There is a possibility, and I'm certainly going to refer to Scotty and this work, but one of the things that needs to be focused is what are facility needs of this district and over what period of time. And theoretically, we looked at what can you issue in 5 years. So if we extend that length and say we might build the final elementary in the 6th year, we theoretically could come up and say in the next 6 years we don't anticipate a tax increase with something like $115 million, $117 million. We just know that that $97 million number is over the next 5 years. But again, we don't know what interest rates are going to be, we don't know what's going to happen in taxable value or population. That might be a reason we might look at waiting a couple of weeks. Any thoughts, Scotty?
No, I mean, there's a lot of merit-based questions about needs, which I understand. Anytime, in my mind, the calculus is, okay, so here's the needs. on the back end, there's a cost to the information, right? And I guess our point was, if you're gonna go for information costs anyway, once you engage in a persuasion, an information campaign about a tax increase, obviously there's a ceiling, but between option B and C, it's the same cost, right? So in our minds, it really comes down to are we gonna raise taxes or not? If you're gonna raise taxes, it's gonna be a whole campaign. If you're not going to, a standard solid district information campaign is fine. You know what I mean? So look at the needs, and if the need exists, then let's plan an information campaign that's more aggressive, that it pushes. Because the trouble is, here's the trouble. Voters are dealing with a president who tweets every day, right? News stations that they're not all watching the same news every day. They're all watching different newses across 1,000 different channels. The act of breaking through that din and getting into their heads for even a few moments is at a higher cost than it's ever been. And so don't underestimate what it takes to get their consciousness to realize what's going on. The most common thing when there's a tax increase on the table is that they talk about it with a couple of friends that maybe see a post on Facebook and they're in the voting booth. And maybe they seek out the district website, maybe if you're lucky. So that's the cost. And I'm not trying to discourage you from doing that. I just want to say, like, if the district needs it and it's time to go after that, just realize that then the information campaign has to be bigger than if it's not a tax increase. And I guess our point was, regardless if it's B or C, it's the same cost. So why not go for C?
Yeah, that was good. It's either A or C, raise taxes or not. If you raise taxes, just go for C.
That's our perception, because the cost is the same and the disproportionate benefit is the same. My answer is if you go for B and you lose and you could have had A, then you should have gone for C and lost, right? It's the same situation. And it costs you the same amount of money, you know?
Now, I'm just going to talk from my experience. What Preston is saying, and I appreciate what you're saying, Preston, is that if we extend how many years we can go into offering, to issuing bonds to 6 years or 7 years, and you include Roosevelt, for example, in that process, you're not going to build Roosevelt any quicker than if we just have this bond and then have Roosevelt on the next bond. If Dean were here, we talked about the last project on the 2012 bond as the North Ogden Gym project. And we gave a deadline at that time when we were going to have that built. We were a year ahead of schedule, and yet all we heard was backlash. When are you going to build it? When are you going to build it? So you pass a 2017 bond that includes Roosevelt, and in 2022, it's not built?
So I guess,
I'll be glad I'm in my rocking chair.
well, I guess what the issue is we have 3 options board members to look at to try to maximize our efforts on the money we can get to do the project. Preston was just kind of doing some storm and saying, hey, if you're looking at maximizing, let's go with this. We might have that option. If that's the case, then we drop the project, which has always been my opinion anyway, just my suggestion as a board member, because I'm comfortable with saying we just do the project we can do. And the next one is whoever's here on the board is available to do that again, and we try to create some capacity, and then you can do the same thing again without tax increase.
One thing too, it is for the bodies, the clock is ticking. We have a very short window amount of education campaign.
Deferral. But the other thing that deferral does is we've got we've got an entire video production to get taken care of, so that and they're 30 days to work on that one basically. I just don't think that you pick up anything, quite frankly. And that's my alma mater. Roosevelt's my alma mater. It's Doug's neighborhood school.
Kids,
And it needs to be replaced.
It does, but we're not ready for it right now because we don't have property. We've got to acquire property to square up that land. And that's 5 home sites that we've got to acquire. There's a lot of ifs, and it pushes it out at least 5 or 6 years. I'm telling you, you put it on the 2017 bond, and it's not done in 4 or 5 years, it's not gonna be a positive for this board.
It's the pitchfork snack samples again.
Yeah.
We're gonna get that anyway, just because some people are gonna want it. I think they're still gonna, it's the nature of the beast, we're going out to doing something, and somebody's not gonna get a piece of it. And you know that.
I'd like to walk with people disappointment, but the next one moves up the best in their interest.
We've got a history. Think of it, a 94 bond, a 2000 bond, a 2006 bond, a 2012 bond, a 2017 bond. And in all those cases, there's been no rate increase. I think you have to go back to either, Robert, did you verify that? Was it the 94, 2000 when there was a,
I haven't verified that.
but you've got to go back a long ways since there was a rate increase. When we passed the 2012 bond, and I still remember, Preston, the chart that you had prepared, we didn't have any capacity until 2023. None. Here we are 5 years later, and we can bond for $97 million without a rate increase. What brings that about? Growth in assessed property value. Growth is what brings that about. And I'm confident that same pattern will continue.
But that brings problematic issues, because when I'm gone, and we've got people that are out there, the west area, northwest area wants a high school. And that's gonna be a major piece of that next bond. And I know you heard it.
Yeah,
I know you're hearing it.
I think that's part of that communication we talked about.
And that's a chunk.
The people in Hooper, for some reason, have in their head
We're doing this.
that for years, the next high school will be in Hooper, and that's not how the
Well, we have
forecast.
the property, but.
That's not how the forecast shows it, but that's the perception that they have.
Well,
So we need to clear some of that up.
and those that are arguing that we need new high school now, if you created a new high school now, you'd pull 800 kids from Fremont, and you'd pull 500 kids from Roy. Okay? Now you got Roy at about 12 or 1,300,
Right.
a new school at about 12 or 1,300, and Fremont at about 12 or 1,300. 3 high schools with a capacity of 2,000, and each of them about 700 or 800 students below capacity.
Yeah, running at 55%.
We don't need a new high school right now. You know,
But
new high
that's
school.
the perception that everybody thinks, and that's what I say, we need to get some numbers out to them.
Right.
So that they become aware. I think it just helps the time.
Well, but the perceptions they talk to the 12 new classrooms we're building. They're gonna see new classrooms being built, but do they remember that we're eliminating 12 portables? They won't remember that.
They don't remember.
They're just
in
simply
23
saying,
years
you're doing
since
growth,
school
there's
was
growth,
built.
there's growth, there's growth. We must need a new high school.
Yeah.
My kids can't eat more, there's 3 luncheons out there. I mean, it just goes on. I hear that all the time. And so, somebody else is gonna have to make that decision, but that more up to me says, I think we, first opinion allows them to have that capacity grow and potentially stack on a small increase to meet those needs that they need down the road. So my score says, I take A and we just move on forward and we move with the number that we can and appreciate the President's reaction to say, I know you guys want to maximize to get what you can, and there's a potential, that's where we were pushing that back. So, Robert.
I was gonna say another thing, on Y2K Analytics, you remember, they surveyed before they even gave the projects, and and before they even knew what the projects were, 3 of the towns were greater than 50%, 1 was not, the Weaver was not. And so before projects were even listed, we're wringing our hands over nothing in the Bonneville town, but they were voting for it.
They were the highest.
Anyway, they're the highest. And so that tells you something that there's a different culture here in this cone than there is in North Rockland.
And I probably said too much, but, when I look at our history, those projects that end up on a bond list are absolutely critical. They were needed probably yesterday. When I look at options B and option C, will they be needed in the future? Absolutely. are they needed today? With the boundary adjustments, we carved out 450 seats at Rocky Mountain Junior High School. And we know those are going to be filled with growth, but we carved out 450 seats at Rocky Mountain Junior High School with the boundary adjustments. We've carved out seats at Kingsville. We've got some capacity to do some shifting to West Weaver. To move toward B or C, quite frankly, would take us away from the history that we've, sort of followed. Yeah, that when there's a bond project, it is absolutely crucial. We need it yesterday. And there's no arguing with that. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. I'm here with that. So with that, we get some direction. You got to give us some direction. No, you haven't. You have every right to carry on. Mitzi, you're so loud I can't even hear you.
Well, I'm thinking, I'm not the old voters on this target, and I'm a regular.
Seasoned.
Anyway, and so I'm one who votes regularly, and I usually go basically with, well, you probably should have had my picture, because that's basically what I do. And I think, in my view, it's better safe and go with a sure shot than go with C and fail. He's recommending C. And I can see that if we fail, then where are we?
We're at right now.
And so I think,
Can I clarify? I am not recommending C. So what I'm saying is option A is safe. And if you're going to work at it, you may as well go for C. B is kind of, why did you spend so much time on B when you were done C? But my argument is similar. Option A, relatively safe, right? You still have to inform people, but they're inclined to go for it.
I really appreciate your input from the history of how the district has functioned successfully. And I really do appreciate that. It depends a lot on your experience, yes, that's experience of having seen us be able to meet commitments and continue on. And so I really appreciate that input.
Are you comfortable with saying, like, you're okay with that?
I would be supportive of
We
it.
feel to death?
Yeah,
Me
okay.
too. Yeah. Direction, I believe. We can just, and that decision or when board meeting is up, we may give. And with that, do you have anything else?
Well, these are big decisions. I really appreciate the board from White Tooth. Thank you, Preston and Matt. Tremendous. It's so nice to have these kind of partnerships. But this information tonight was so valuable. We didn't do this in 2006 or 2012. And it really is insightful for us as we prepare to share information with our patrons and help them understand some of the critical issues that are being faced. It's just valuable insight.
Thank you, Wayne. We know you've got a lot of stress that you can deal with. I'm sure you'll start that tonight.
That would be.
You're not a problem. You've done it before. White 2J, Scotty, thank you guys for coming out. Matt and Preston, thank you. Staff, thanks for your help. And even you, Bobby.
Also, me,
Thank you. So with
Thanks to
that,
the Standard Examiner for providing.
Standard Examiner, thank you for providing such positive minutes. With that, we'll be adjourned until tomorrow night. Bye.
Thanks, Trent. You bet.